What if I told you that some of the most groundbreaking television shows of the 1960s didn't just get canceled? They were systematically buried so deep that even mentioning them today makes network executives nervous. These shows tackled forbidden subjects, broke unwritten rules, and challenged American values in ways that made entire families turn off their TVs and write angry letters to Congress. Number 14. The Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour. This wasn't just variety television with a laugh track. It was television's first primetime rebellion disguised as harmless sibling comedy. Tommy and Dick Smothers looked like clean-cut entertainers, but they were secretly broadcasting anti-war messages and political satire that made CBS executives break into cold sweats every Sunday night. The brothers constantly fought with network censors over Vietnam War jokes that CBS deemed too controversial for family viewing. They invited folk singers who performed protest songs, featured comedians making jokes about government policies, and openly criticized President Johnson during primetime television. CBS executives received thousands of complaint letters from viewers who felt the show was too political and unpatriotic. Behind the scenes, the network was secretly cutting entire segments before broadcast. The Smothers Brothers fought back by booking guests like Pete Seeger, who had been blacklisted from television for decades due to his political beliefs. They featured Joan Baez dedicating songs to her imprisoned husband, a Vietnam War protester. The final straw came when CBS refused to air a segment featuring anti-war comedian David Steinberg, delivering a religious-themed routine. The network claimed it was blasphemous, but the real issue was the show's growing reputation as television's most dangerous political platform. CBS canceled the show in 1969, claiming breach of contract, leading to a legal battle that lasted years and ended with the brothers winning significant damages but losing their television careers. Number 13. East Side, West Side. CBS thought they were creating a simple drama about social workers in New York City. Instead, they accidentally produced television's most brutal examination of urban poverty and racial inequality. This show didn't just acknowledge that poor people existed, it showed their lives in graphic detail that made middle-class America deeply uncomfortable. George C. Scott starred as Neil Brock, a social worker dealing with cases involving child abuse, domestic violence, and drug addiction in ways that no primetime show had ever attempted. Episodes featured realistic portrayals of slum conditions, welfare families, and racial discrimination that shocked viewers expecting lighter entertainment. The show dealt with topics like unwed mothers, juvenile delinquency, and urban crime with documentary-style realism. Religious groups complained that the show was too depressing and violent for family viewing. Advertisers pulled sponsorship because they didn't want their products associated with such harsh social commentary. Southern television stations refused to air episodes dealing with racial integration, claiming they were too controversial for their audiences. One particularly shocking episode featured Scott's character entering a tenement building where multiple families lived in conditions that resembled a war zone. The camera showed rats, broken plumbing, and children living in environments that most viewers had never imagined existed in America. CBS received angry letters demanding the show be moved to late night or canceled entirely because it was too realistic and disturbing for primetime family entertainment. Number 12. The Ugliest Girl in Town. ABC created what might be television's most bizarre and controversial premise. A man dressing as a woman to become a famous fashion model, creating gender confusion that made 1960s audiences question everything they thought they knew about identity and relationships. This wasn't comedy. It was cultural chaos disguised as light entertainment. Peter Kastner played Timothy Blair, who disguised himself as Timmy to help his girlfriend's modeling career, but became a successful female model while hiding his true identity from everyone, including romantic interests. The show featured Timothy in romantic situations with men who believed he was actually a woman, creating storylines that pushed network boundaries to their breaking point. Episodes dealt with cross-dressing and identity confusion in ways that religious groups found deeply offensive. Conservative viewers complained that the show promoted behavior that went against traditional family values and confused young viewers about appropriate gender roles. Many stations received protest letters demanding immediate cancellation. The show's treatment of romance was particularly controversial. Timothy, while dressed as Timmy, would go on dates with men who were genuinely attracted to what they believed was a woman. These scenes made viewers uncomfortable because they challenged assumptions about relationships and attraction in ways that 1960s society wasn't prepared to handle. ABC executives quickly realized they had created a programming nightmare that advertisers wouldn't support and audiences couldn't accept. The show was quietly canceled after just 2 seasons, and most episodes have never been shown in reruns because their content is considered too problematic for modern audiences. Number 11. He and She. This sitcom looked harmless enough, but it was actually television's first real attempt at showing a marriage between equals. Paula Prentice and Richard Benjamin played a couple who shared household duties, career ambitions, and decision-making in ways that made traditional families extremely uncomfortable about changing gender roles. The show featured a wife who had her own career and opinions, challenging the standard television portrayal of women as homemakers who deferred to their husbands. Episodes showed the couple arguing about money, careers, and responsibilities in realistic ways that made some viewers question their own relationships. Paula's character was independent, assertive, and unwilling to simply follow her husband's lead. Critics praised the show's realistic dialogue and genuine chemistry between the leads, but audiences weren't ready for a television marriage that looked like actual partnership rather than traditional hierarchy. Religious groups complained that the show undermined family values by showing a wife who didn't automatically defer to her husband's authority. Behind the scenes, CBS executives were nervous about episodes that showed the wife making major decisions without consulting her husband or pursuing career goals that conflicted with traditional domestic responsibilities. Advertisers worried that showing independent women might alienate housewife consumers who bought their products. The show won Emmy nominations and critical acclaim, but ratings declined as viewers gravitated toward more traditional family comedies. CBS canceled it after just 2 seasons, despite its quality, because it was ahead of its time in ways that made mainstream audiences uncomfortable with its progressive portrayal of marriage equality. Number 10. The Prisoner. Patrick McGoohan created television's most paranoid masterpiece, a psychological thriller that questioned government authority and individual freedom in ways that made Cold War America extremely nervous. This wasn't science fiction, it was political commentary, disguised as surreal adventure that challenged everything viewers believed about freedom and control. McGoohan played Number 6, a former secret agent trapped in a mysterious village where everyone had numbers instead of names, and escape was impossible. The show featured psychological torture, brainwashing attempts, and surveillance themes that felt too real during an era of government paranoia and social unrest. Episodes dealt with topics like mind control, political manipulation, and loss of individual identity. The show's anti-authority message made government officials and network executives uncomfortable. Episodes featured thinly veiled criticisms of both democratic and communist political systems, suggesting that all governments ultimately sought to control their citizens. The village itself served as a metaphor for modern society, where people traded freedom for security. CBS struggled with how to market a show that questioned the very foundations of Western democracy. The network aired episodes out of order, making the complex storyline even more confusing for viewers, trying to follow McGoohan's intricate plotting. Many episodes were moved to late-night slots because their political content was considered too controversial for primetime family viewing. The show's finale, which revealed that Number 1 was actually Number 6 himself, suggested that people were responsible for their own oppression. This philosophical ending confused and angered viewers expecting simple resolution, leading to complaints that the show was too intellectual and anti-American for mainstream television entertainment. Number 9. Run for Your Life. Ben Gazzara starred as Paul Bryan, a lawyer told he had only a year to live who decided to experience everything life had to offer. This premise sounds innocent until you realize the show featured a man engaging in behavior that challenged every social convention of 1960s morality, from casual relationships to dangerous adventures that shocked conservative viewers. Episodes showed Bryan pursuing experiences that included gambling, drinking, and romantic encounters with multiple women as he tried to live a lifetime in 1 year. The show dealt with themes of mortality and hedonism that made religious groups extremely uncomfortable. Brian's lifestyle represented everything that traditional family values opposed, yet the show presented it as justified because of his terminal diagnosis. The series featured Brian in situations that included underground gambling, exotic travel, and relationships with women from different social classes and backgrounds. These storylines challenged social norms about appropriate behavior for middle-class professionals. Episodes dealt with topics like organized crime, political corruption, and moral compromise in ways that made viewers question their own ethical boundaries. NBC received complaints from religious organizations claiming the show promoted immoral behavior and encouraged viewers to abandon traditional values. Parents worried that young people would see Brian's lifestyle as glamorous and exciting, rather than understanding the tragic circumstances that motivated his choices. The show's treatment of mortality was also controversial because it suggested that facing death justified abandoning social conventions and moral restraints. This message made church groups angry because it seemed to promote living for immediate pleasure, rather than following traditional moral guidelines that emphasize sacrifice and responsibility over personal fulfillment. Number 8. Coronet Blue. This psychological thriller featured Frank Converse as a man with complete amnesia trying to discover his identity while avoiding mysterious enemies who wanted him dead. The show dealt with themes of identity, government conspiracy, and psychological manipulation that made Cold War audiences paranoid about their own government and society. Episodes featured the protagonist discovering fragments of his past that suggested involvement in government operations, international espionage, and dangerous secrets that powerful people wanted buried. The show's treatment of memory loss and identity confusion reflected larger cultural anxieties about brainwashing, mind control, and government manipulation of citizens during the height of Cold War tensions. The series dealt with paranoia and conspiracy themes that made network executives nervous about appearing unpatriotic or encouraging distrust of government institutions. Episodes suggested that ordinary citizens could be manipulated, controlled, or eliminated by powerful forces they didn't understand, reflecting real fears about government overreach and social control. CBS struggled with how to handle a show that encouraged viewers to question authority and suspect conspiracy in everyday situations. The network worried that the show's paranoid themes might be interpreted as anti-government propaganda during a time when national unity was considered essential for national security. The show was canceled after just 1 season, officially due to low ratings. But industry insiders suggested that its controversial themes and government conspiracy plotlines made advertisers and network executives too uncomfortable to continue. The series has rarely been shown in reruns because its themes remain politically sensitive even decades later. Number 7. The Cara Williams Show. This sitcom featured Williams as a married woman who hid her marriage from her employer because company policy prohibited hiring married women. The premise challenged workplace discrimination and women's rights in ways that made 1960s employers and traditional families extremely uncomfortable about changing social expectations. Episodes dealt with the difficulties of maintaining elaborate deceptions to keep both career and marriage, highlighting the unfair employment practices that forced women to choose between personal relationships and professional success. The show addressed topics like workplace equality, women's independence, and discriminatory hiring practices that made business leaders nervous about changing social attitudes. The series featured Williams navigating situations where her career ambitions conflicted with traditional expectations about wives and mothers. Episodes showed her character excelling at work while maintaining a secret marriage, proving that women could successfully balance both roles if given the opportunity. This message challenged employers who believed married women were unreliable employees. Religious groups complained that the show promoted deception and undermined traditional family values by suggesting that women should prioritize careers over domestic responsibilities. Conservative viewers worried that young women would see Williams's character as a role model and demand similar opportunities for career advancement. CBS canceled the show after 2 seasons, claiming low ratings. But industry observers noted that advertisers were reluctant to sponsor programming that challenged traditional employment practices. The show's themes about workplace discrimination and women's rights were ahead of their time and made business communities uncomfortable about potential changes to established hiring practices. Number 6, My World and Welcome to It. Based on James Thurber's cartoons and writings, this show featured William Wyndham as a cartoonist whose fantasy life often overshadowed reality. While the premise sounds harmless, the show actually dealt with mental health, marriage problems, and social alienation in ways that made 1960s audiences uncomfortable about discussing psychological issues. Episodes featured the main character escaping into elaborate fantasies to avoid dealing with real-world problems like marriage conflicts, work stress, and social pressures. The show's treatment of psychological escape and mental health issues was controversial because it suggested that normal people might need professional help or might be struggling with serious emotional problems. The series dealt with themes of domestic unhappiness and male midlife crisis that challenged the image of successful suburban families. Episodes showed the protagonist struggling with feelings of inadequacy, depression, and disconnection from his family and community. These storylines made viewers uncomfortable because they reflected real problems that many families preferred to keep private. NBC received complaints from mental health professionals who worried that the show trivialized serious psychological conditions by presenting them as comedy material. Religious groups complained that the show promoted escaping from reality rather than facing problems with faith and determination. The show won an Emmy Award for Wyndham's performance and received critical praise for its innovative blend of live action and animation. However, its treatment of mental health and marriage problems made audiences uncomfortable with its realistic portrayal of suburban dissatisfaction and psychological struggles that challenged the image of successful American family life. Number 5, Turn On. This experimental comedy show lasted exactly 1 episode before being pulled from the air, but that single broadcast was so controversial that it changed television censorship forever. Created by the team behind Laugh-In, Turn On featured rapid-fire sketches, computer-generated graphics, and content that was considered too adult and bizarre for primetime television. The show featured sketches about topics that included adult relationships, political satire, and social commentary delivered at a pace that confused and overwhelmed viewers. The experimental format included flashing lights, psychedelic graphics, and unconventional comedy that made audiences feel like they were watching television from another planet. ABC affiliates received angry phone calls during the broadcast from viewers complaining that the show was inappropriate, confusing, and offensive. Some stations actually stopped broadcasting the episode midway through after switchboards were flooded with complaints. The show's experimental approach to comedy was so far ahead of its time that audiences couldn't process what they were seeing. Network executives panicked as complaints poured in from affiliates, advertisers, and viewers. The show was canceled before the first episode finished airing in some markets, making it the shortest-lived series in television history. ABC issued apologies and promised that future programming would be more appropriate for family viewing. The turn-on controversy led to stricter network censorship and more conservative programming policies that affected television content for years afterward. The show's failure proved that audiences weren't ready for experimental television that challenged conventional entertainment formats and social attitudes. Number 4, Occasional Wife. This sitcom featured a bizarre premise that challenged marriage conventions and social expectations in ways that made traditional families extremely uncomfortable. Patricia Hardy played a woman who pretended to be married to her upstairs neighbor to help his career while maintaining her own independent lifestyle and romantic relationships. Episodes dealt with the complications of maintaining fake marriage appearances, while both characters pursued real romantic relationships with other people. The show featured situations where the pretend couple had to act married in public while living completely separate private lives, challenging traditional expectations about marriage and relationships. The series addressed topics like career advancement, social expectations, and relationship honesty that made conservative viewers uncomfortable. Episodes showed how society pressured people to conform to expected life patterns, even when those patterns didn't match their actual desires or circumstances. The show suggested that traditional marriage expectations might be outdated and unrealistic.
NBC received complaints from religious groups who felt the show made light of marriage as a sacred institution. Conservative viewers worried that young people would see the fake marriage arrangement as acceptable and might question the importance of real marriage commitments. The show's treatment of independent women and non-traditional relationships was ahead of its time, but made mainstream audiences uncomfortable. Episodes featured the female character maintaining her own career, apartment, and social life while pretending to be a traditional wife when necessary, challenging expectations about women's roles and priorities in ways that conservative society wasn't ready to accept. Number 3. The Avengers. This British import featured Diana Rigg and Patrick Macnee as secret agents solving bizarre crimes with style and sophistication. While the show appeared to be harmless spy fiction, it actually challenged traditional gender roles and social conventions in ways that made American audiences uncomfortable about changing expectations for men and women. Emma Peel, played by Rigg, was television's first truly equal female partner in an action series. She was intelligent, capable, and independent, often outperforming her male colleague in combat and problem-solving situations. This portrayal challenged traditional expectations about women's capabilities and roles in professional relationships. The show featured sophisticated dialogue, unconventional plots, and relationship dynamics that suggested men and women could work together as equals rather than following traditional hierarchy patterns. Episodes dealt with themes of power, control, and partnership that made some viewers question their own assumptions about gender roles and relationships. ABC struggled with how to present a show that featured a woman who was clearly the intellectual and physical equal of her male partner. The network worried that American audiences wouldn't accept a female character who was portrayed as competent and independent, rather than needing protection or guidance from men. Religious and conservative groups complained that the show promoted inappropriate behavior for women and undermined traditional family values by showing a woman who prioritized career and adventure over domestic responsibilities. The show's sophisticated British approach to relationships and social conventions made many American viewers uncomfortable with its progressive attitudes toward gender equality and partnership. Number 2. The Time Tunnel. This science fiction series featured two scientists trapped in time, witnessing historical events while trying to return to their own era. While the premise sounds like harmless adventure, the show actually challenged historical narratives and social assumptions in ways that made conservative audiences uncomfortable about questioning accepted versions of American history. Episodes featured the time travelers observing historical events from different perspectives, often revealing that official historical accounts were incomplete or biased. The show dealt with topics like slavery, war, and social injustice in ways that challenged viewers to reconsider their understanding of American history and values. The series featured storylines that showed historical figures as complex human beings rather than the simplified heroes or villains presented in textbooks. Episodes dealing with events like the Civil War, World War II, and Western expansion presented multiple viewpoints that complicated traditional patriotic narratives about American greatness and moral superiority. ABC received complaints from conservative groups who felt the show was unpatriotic and undermined traditional historical education. Parents worried that children would become confused about American history if they saw complex presentations of events that contradicted simplified school lessons about good versus evil. The show's treatment of historical events as morally complex rather than clearly defined battles between right and wrong made educators and political leaders uncomfortable. Episodes suggested that understanding history required examining multiple perspectives and questioning official narratives, challenging traditional approaches to patriotic education and historical understanding. Number 1. The Outer Limits. This anthology series pushed the boundaries of science fiction television by addressing contemporary social issues through allegorical storytelling that made network executives and conservative viewers extremely nervous. Episodes dealt with topics like nuclear war, racial prejudice, and government control using alien and futuristic settings as metaphors for real-world problems. The show featured stories that challenged human assumptions about morality, civilization, and progress in ways that made viewers question their own society and values. Episodes like The Zanti Misfits dealt with criminal justice and social outcasts, while Demon with a Glass Hand explored themes of identity and humanity that reflected contemporary anxieties about technology and social change. ABC struggled with episodes that used science fiction premises to criticize American society, politics, and values. The network received complaints from viewers who felt the show was too dark, depressing, and anti-American for family entertainment. Many episodes were moved to late-night slots because their content was considered too mature and controversial for primetime viewing. The series dealt with nuclear anxiety, racial tensions, and social problems that many viewers preferred to ignore or avoid. Episodes featured aliens and monsters that represented real fears about war, prejudice, and social breakdown, making the show feel uncomfortably relevant to contemporary problems. The Outer Limits was canceled after 2 seasons because its challenging content made advertisers nervous and audiences uncomfortable. The show's willingness to address serious social issues through science fiction storytelling was ahead of its time and too controversial for mainstream television audiences who preferred escapist entertainment to thought-provoking social commentary. These weren't just TV shows that got canceled. They were cultural earthquakes that networks buried because they asked questions America wasn't ready to answer. From gender-bending comedies to paranoid thrillers, these series challenged every assumption about family, society, and power that 1960s audiences held sacred. Which of these forbidden shows would you most want to see today? And here's the real question that'll keep you thinking. If these shows were too controversial for the supposedly rebellious 1960s, what does that say about the shows we're not allowed to see right now?